The world held its breath, teetering on the edge of an abyss. It was October 1962, a month that would be remembered for generations. The Cold War was at its frostiest, with tensions between the superpowers reaching a fever pitch. The United States and the Soviet Union, armed with nuclear weapons, stood on the precipice of unimaginable destruction, each side unwilling to back down. At the heart of this global crisis was a small island nation, Cuba, a mere pawn in a much larger game. The Soviet Union, led by Nikita Khrushchev, had placed nuclear missiles on Cuban soil, a mere 90 miles from the American coastline, a move that escalated the stakes dramatically. This act set the stage for a tense standoff, a confrontation that would forever be etched in history as the Cuban Missile Crisis, a moment when the world came closest to nuclear war. The discovery of these missiles by American spy planes sent shockwaves through the Kennedy administration, igniting a flurry of urgent meetings and strategic discussions. President John F. Kennedy, young and untested in such dire circumstances, faced an unprecedented threat, one that required both courage and wisdom. The presence of Soviet missiles so close to American shores was intolerable, a direct challenge to U.S. national security, and a provocation that could not be ignored. The world watched with bated breath as the two superpowers stared each other down, the fate of humanity hanging precariously in the balance, every decision carrying the weight of potential catastrophe. The threat of nuclear war, once a distant nightmare, had become a terrifying reality, a specter that loomed over every corner of the globe. The initial discovery of the missiles was a moment of sheer disbelief and alarm for the Kennedy administration. Urgent meetings were convened with President Kennedy and his closest advisors scrambling to assess the situation and formulate a response. The public's response was one of shock and fear as news of the missiles spread, bringing the terrifying reality of nuclear war into living rooms across America. President Kennedy's televised address to the nation sought to reassure a frightened public, even as he outlined the grave danger posed by the Soviet missiles in Cuba. The immediate reaction involved a series of military preparations, including a naval blockade of Cuba, aimed at preventing further Soviet shipments of military equipment. As the world watched, the tension escalated, with every passing hour bringing the superpowers closer to the brink of nuclear conflict. The key figures in this high-stakes drama were larger-than-life characters who found themselves thrust onto the global stage, each playing a pivotal role in shaping the course of history. John F. Kennedy, the charismatic American president, projected an image of youthful resolve in the face of Soviet aggression, embodying the hopes and fears of a nation on the brink. Before the crisis, Kennedy had already faced significant challenges, including the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, which had strained U.S.-Cuban relations. His every word, every decision, was scrutinized by a world on edge, as the media and public alike hung on his every move. Kennedy's personal stakes were high, as he sought to prove his leadership and avoid another humiliating setback. Opposite him stood Nikita Khrushchev, the Soviet premier, a seasoned Cold Warrior determined to assert Soviet strength on the world stage, challenging the West at every turn. Khrushchev had previously engaged in tense negotiations with Kennedy, including the Vienna summit, where their ideological differences were starkly highlighted. Caught in the middle of this geopolitical struggle was Fidel Castro, the fiery revolutionary leader of Cuba, whose actions would have far-reaching consequences. Castro's alignment with the Soviet Union was partly a response to the Bay of Pigs invasion, seeking protection against further U.S. aggression. Castro had recently aligned himself with the Soviet Union, welcoming their military aid and protection, thus becoming a key player in this global chess game. His personal stakes were immense as he aimed to secure his revolution and maintain his grip on power. These three men, each with their own motivations and ideologies, held the fate of the world in their hands, navigating a perilous path fraught with danger. Their previous interactions and personal stakes added layers of complexity to the crisis. The weight of their decisions, the consequences of miscalculation, were almost too great to comprehend as the world watched with bated breath. For 13 harrowing days in October 1962, the world teetered on the brink of nuclear war. On October 16th, President Kennedy was informed of the Soviet missile installations in Cuba. The next day, he convened the Executive Committee of the National Security Council. By October 22nd, Kennedy addressed the nation, announcing the naval blockade or quarantine of Cuba to prevent further Soviet shipments. On October 24th, Soviet ships approached the quarantine line, and the world held its breath as American warships took up positions off the Cuban coast. October 25th saw intense diplomatic communications, with the United Nations playing a crucial role in mediating between the superpowers. On October 27th, known as Black Saturday, an American U-2 spy plane was shot down over Cuba, escalating tensions to a fever pitch. Finally, on October 28th, Khrushchev agreed to dismantle the missile installations in exchange for a U.S. pledge not to invade Cuba and the secret removal of American missiles from Turkey. The world watched, prayed, and hoped for a peaceful resolution to this terrifying standoff. Finally, after 13 days of agonizing uncertainty, a breakthrough emerged. The world held its breath as the two superpowers inched closer to the brink of nuclear war. Khrushchev agreed to remove the Soviet missiles from Cuba, diffusing the immediate crisis. This decision was a pivotal moment in the Cold War, showcasing the power of diplomacy. In return, the United States secretly agreed to remove its own Jupiter missiles from Turkey, missiles that had been a point of contention for the Soviets. This quid pro quo was kept under wraps to maintain the delicate balance of power. The crisis was over, but its impact would reverberate for decades to come. The world had come perilously close to nuclear annihilation, and the lessons learned would shape international relations for generations. The Cuban Missile Crisis highlighted the terrifying consequences of Cold War brinkmanship. It was a stark reminder of the destructive potential of nuclear weapons. It underscored the fragility of peace in a world armed with nuclear weapons. The crisis made it clear that even a small miscalculation could lead to catastrophic consequences. In the aftermath of the crisis, both the United States and the Soviet Union took steps to improve communication and reduce the risk of future misunderstandings. This was a crucial step towards ensuring global stability. A direct hotline was established between Washington and Moscow, a symbolic link intended to facilitate communication between the leaders of the two superpowers. This red phone became an enduring symbol of the need for direct dialogue. The Cuban Missile Crisis, though terrifying in its intensity, ultimately served as a wake-up call, a moment of clarity in the fog of Cold War tensions. It had long-term impacts on international relations, leading to a series of arms control agreements, including the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty and the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The crisis also influenced subsequent Cold War events, such as the détente period and the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, SALT. It underscored the importance of diplomacy and restraint in the nuclear age, highlighting the constant effort required to maintain peace in a volatile world. The Cuban Missile Crisis left an indelible mark on history. It led to significant changes in how the superpowers approached nuclear diplomacy. The establishment of the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks were direct results of the crisis. In the years that followed, these agreements played a crucial role in stabilizing global tensions. The Nuclear Test Ban Treaty of 1963 prohibited all test detonations of nuclear weapons except for those conducted underground. This was a significant step in curbing the nuclear arms race and reducing environmental contamination from radioactive fallout. The Non-Proliferation Treaty, signed in 1968, aimed to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons and promote peaceful uses of nuclear energy. It established a framework for international cooperation and set the stage for future arms control agreements. The Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, or SALT, which began in the 1970s, marked the first time the United States and the Soviet Union engaged in comprehensive negotiations to limit their strategic arsenals. These talks resulted in significant agreements, such as the SALT-Wine Treaty, which imposed limits on the number of strategic ballistic missile launchers. The world learned the importance of communication, restraint, and the devastating potential of nuclear weapons. The establishment of a direct hotline between Washington and Moscow was a testament to this newfound understanding. This red phone ensured that the leaders of the two superpowers could communicate directly in times of crisis, reducing the risk of misunderstandings that could escalate into conflict. The Cuban Missile Crisis also had a profound impact on public consciousness. It brought the reality of nuclear war into the living rooms of ordinary people around the world. The terrifying prospect of global annihilation prompted widespread calls for disarmament and a re-evaluation of the policies that had brought the world to the brink of disaster. This chapter will explore these developments and their lasting legacy. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a sobering reminder of the fragility of peace in an age of nuclear weapons. It underscored the need for constant vigilance, diplomacy, and the pursuit of arms control to ensure that such a crisis never happens again. As we reflect on this pivotal moment in history, we are reminded of the crucial lessons it taught us. The Cuban Missile Crisis was not just a confrontation between two superpowers. It was a wake-up call for humanity. It highlighted the importance of dialogue, understanding, and the shared responsibility of all nations to work towards a safer, more peaceful world.